still some Middle Archaic sites could have been closer to the coast that have been inundated. But because there was smaller population, they're harder to find. We do see a lot more burial ceremonialism, and burials are very, they are hard to find because, as I said, bones do not last, but a lot of cremations started taking place. We find more cremations in the late Archaic with red ochre. So there's a lot more of a diversity of sites as well.
Was there coyotes and dogs back then?
Yes.
And did you find any teeth or
We did not find any dog remains, but there have been, we have found dog burials on other sites, and dating to the late Archaic. But we didn't at J.T. Berry. We found very small pieces of mammal bone, burned bone, in a lot of the features. So that was all that was left.
I was wondering if they made the jewelry.
In the late Archaic, people were still camping. There's a lot of diversity in the types of sites, but this is from a diorama of the Northeast and the Albany State Museum. We've also found sites dating to the late Archaic, and this is one from Middleborough, the Wampanoag site, where there was a snail shell. We found the post molds were found that suggested it was snail shell type house structure. And that could have been for warmth
and protection.
Or protection. And we don't know about social interaction during this time. I mean, were those spear points only for hunting? We don't know. They could have been for some kind of warfare, but we don't find, because we don't find the burials, we have a very hard time reconstructing that. And then in the middle woodland, things do have changed quite a bit. One of the things about the woodland period is there's pottery. We didn't find any pottery at J.T. Berry. We just found that one beautiful point, and we have some radiocarbon dates. But they do have pottery. People are still hunter-gatherers, fishers. There's a little bit of evidence of some horticulture, deliberate planting of different species. And actually, about 1,000 years ago is when we start to see corn coming in. But there's, we find a lot more large sites along coast, big shell middens in the middle woodland. So those are the time periods, and maybe, village areas looked more like this, and more permanent villages, but I shouldn't say really permanent villages. I mean, I think people were still moving around. In New England, it was never like, people were hunter-gatherers up until basically the time of European contact. They never turned into full-scale agriculturalists like the Iroquois did about 1,000 years ago. The neighbors right next door, and we think that's because of just all the resources available. It was definitely a choice. They could have. They had it. And this is just showing you the types of pottery that we find. And then starting from the middle woodland, early woodland, they're very plain pots, the first types of pottery we get, and then they become a little more elaborate. And these are the kind that are found basically when Europeans arrived. And the type, the tribe, even though pre-contact we don't have names for the tribes, but of course it would have been around this area of the Massachusetts. And one thing I didn't mention is consultation with Native Americans. We always do consult with the Native American groups when go especially at a data recovery level. And sometimes they like to come out to the site and be out there and monitor, or they may just ask and just want to know what we found and are interested. But we always seek other information.
Can you tell what kind of a tribe there is by the artifacts? What kind of tribe?
Not at this stage. In some places, like where it's very elaborate, you can, especially when you get into pottery sometimes too, when there's more style that you can look at. With the time periods that we're dealing with and the types of artifacts, we can't. It's really the types of artifacts we found here, we find the exact same ones down in southeastern Mass, or even sometimes in New York or New Hampshire or different areas. So overall, we, I think J.T. Berry was a wonderful place to have camped, stayed, and we don't think it was a very large permanent village by any means, but certainly there was a lot of activity, especially from the background research, the archival research that Bullen came up with and that we found, the old notes and talking about all the artifacts found in the area.
Is there any
And-
water on the property?
Excuse me?
Any water on the property?
Water? No, it's not, it sort of sits above Martin's Brook. I mean, Martin's Brook runs right by
If
it.
they stay there, they gotta travel, they got water.
Yes, I mean, yep.
The Wilmington pits, there's water going down.
Yeah, there's
Right
water all
beside
around,
you.
so
Yeah.
they didn't really have to travel that far. But but all I have to say, I mean, of course, there's 10 things in between every line, yes.
How do you get this absolutely perfect square
But
excavation?
a lot of practice. But we do measure, we measure out our square, we put string, and then we use flat shovels to make our lines. And after we finish every 10-centimeter level, we go along with our trowels and we make sure it's nice and clean, because we don't want artifacts falling in, from other levels. So the straight walls are very important.
So it's a machine, I mean, it looks like a machine.
Yes.
When was the Berry Hospital built?
That was built in the beginning of the century, the early, it was the actual J.T. Berry, I believe around 1910, maybe? But I'm not going to be, don't quote me on that. Do you know?
That was a tuberculosis sanitarium
Right.
first, and then it was rebuilt.
It was rebuilt in like the
Building.
40s or 50s.
Most of the buildings were rebuilt for the J.T. Berry Center at a later time, I think in the 1950s or 60s.
Yeah. So a lot of those brick buildings that were there, the more recent ones, but I think that the hospital dates back to the original hospital
In
was
the
quite
early
old,
part
yeah.
of the century.
And of course, part of it was a farm as well.
And it was chosen because they particularly looked for tuberculosis sanitariums for towns that had very pure water and very clean air. With Reading.
Any other questions?
I got one.
Well, yes.
Did the guy that find the thing, did you buy him lunch?
He did. He got to be what we call queen for the day, because whoever found the first artifact of the day, we had to carry his tools and get him whatever he wanted.
Were the artifacts and everything like found in a certain kind of position where like it was set up the same in every
It was varied.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
it was thrown around.
Yes,
Yeah.
some because of the plowing, but, just in terms of where things may have been left.
Under your definition of cultural resource management,
Mm-hmm.
you refer to intangibles. Now, what would the intangibles be?
Things like a cultural landscape or
Oh, okay,
sacred
features.
site, yes.
Oh, I
Sort
got
of,
you.
yes,
Okay.
yes, they're sort of a,
And
they're still,
what state or federal agency, is it DEP? What state or federal agency grants,
the permits.
the permits?
Well, a lot of different permits. Sometimes they need permits from, MEPA, the, Environmental Protection Agency, or if they're gonna be, water, Army Corps, if they're crossing any waters, or affecting any of the waters, you have to get a permit from the Army Corps, and that automatically triggers an archaeological survey under section 106. Curb cuts or, just wetlands, so it's different wildlife permits. So there's all kinds of permits that one requires for doing a big development like that. And they have a nice little museum out there as well. And that's where the state archaeologist's office is. And that's where they review everything and they issue the permits. And so and every state, Rhode Island has one, every state has a state archaeologist that sort of oversees.
I'd like to make an announcement. Tomorrow night in Andover at the Robert S. Peabody Museum, there's an association called the Massachusetts Archaeological Society Northeast Chapter. We meet once a month at the museum. It starts at 7:30. Tomorrow night's lecture is going to be on Vikings in Iceland. And we meet monthly, and as she mentioned, the gentleman that worked at the site came from the Robert S. Peabody, and his collection is up there. You can learn how to use an atlatl. We have contests every year, and we have big bullseyes, and it's pretty amazing. You can run a spear through a double block of hay. It would penetrate a woolly mammoth. You could kill a woolly mammoth with one of those spears. They're about 6 feet long and half-inch diameter. I've tried it. It's pretty exciting. You can also participate in archaeology digs under the tutelage of the resident archaeologist. And it's a monthly meeting. So if you're interested in archaeology, all the stuff that was covered tonight is just...
Yeah, the Massachusetts Archaeological Society.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. So it's in Andover at the Robert S. Peabody, tomorrow night, 7:30, and every month on the third Tuesday. Thank you.
I also want to thank Dianna for her wonderful presentation tonight. And I bet you didn't know all of this was going on in North Reading before we got here.
Please look at the artifacts, and if you have any other questions.
And I'd just like to tell you too that the Historical Commission has some plans afoot, and we hope the artifacts will belong to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but they have tentatively agreed to give the town of North Reading some long-term custody of some of the artifacts if we have a proper place to display them. And we can't think of a more proper place to display them than here at the library. So we're going to work on raising funds to have a good display case and a nice exhibit somewhere here in the library. So it'll be available for everybody to see, and perhaps some kind of an informational brochure that can be handed out too, so that youngsters and newcomers coming along can see what happened before we got here.
And that's great. That's what we'd love to see happen to the collection. Otherwise, they get put into boxes and stored away, and like that last scene in Indiana Jones. The Ark. Never seen it again.
Well, that's it.